Everybody should be comfortable with all kinds of blackness. So the more we can telegraph that into people's living rooms, probably the better.
There's obviously a lot going on in your new movie, Blindspotting. So I would love for you to tell us just a little bit about it, just to kick things off.
Yeah, well, it's following the story of two men, Colin and Miles. I play Colin, my friend Rafael Casal, who also wrote the film with me, plays Miles, who have grown up together in Oakland. They're working as movers. We meet Colin on the last 3 days of his probation for a violent crime.
That was justified.
Well, I'll leave you to figure that out for yourself or not. But while driving home one night, he witnesses the police shooting of an unarmed black man. And so the story is about how this friendship between sort of a black man and a white man who have incredibly similar histories is forced into new directions because of the changing landscape of Oakland, California, and because of their context starting to shift in terms of how the eyes that are on them. And they're working as movers, so they're sort of active participants in gentrifying their own city.
And you just kind of laid it all out because there's so many different themes that I feel the movie just navigates so wonderfully. I mean, you're talking about gentrification, police brutality, toxic masculinity. There's all these things that could have been the theme of separate movies, and yet it's all packed into one. So how do you keep it from being muddled? Because it weaves in and out of all these themes so beautifully.
Yeah, I think we just didn't write a movie about issues. I think we tried to write a movie about people and to portray them and the city of Oakland as honestly as possible, to make people as complicated and human as we possibly could. And you know, I think if we all hold a mirror up to ourselves, we're all dealing with all of those things all the time, you know, so our theory was that would work in a movie as well, as long as everything that our characters are dealing with are also things that all of us are dealing with outside in the real world. We didn't see any reason why we couldn't put it all in one story.
Right, absolutely. And you mentioned Rafael, who's your co-star, co-writer, co-producer, and also longtime friend.
Yeah.
So how has your collaboration process with him evolved over the years? What was it like for this film, and how has it kind of grown?
Yeah, I mean, we'd been working together for a bunch of years before we started working on this film, so we became friends out of collaboration. He was running a studio in North Oakland, and we started making music together. And so working on this film was just kind of a logical extension for us of the way we had always worked, which is to sort of constantly push each other to work in a way where nothing's precious, so that we could get at the truth of whatever the thing is, and to try to make it as good as possible. And this whole process was like that. There's a lot of raps in the film, or things that are in verse, sections that are in verse, even if they're not. I shouldn't call them raps, but I call them raps because that's our background.
Exactly.
And those were the earliest things in the film, were the things that are in bar form. Like, we knew how to do that. We didn't know how to write a screenplay. So it was sort of a decade-long process of us figuring out how to write screenplays around these sections of verse. But yeah, early days were the two of us huddled over the same laptop with our one pirated copy of Final Draft, and literally passing it back and forth. You know, he would write a few lines and send it to me, and I'd delete two of them and write new ones, and you know, and then stopping after a few hours and saying things out loud. And but most of the work really happened on drives up and down the 5 between Oakland and LA. Our producers were in LA. We've been working with the same producers the whole time, Jess and Keith Calder, who that's the only way something like this happens, I think. And but and they were young in the game too. They had done really one movie when we met them, but those were the big Hollywood producers for us, you know, so we were really trying to impress them. So we take these long drives where we talked a lot about the movie and try to really have our story straight by the time we walked in there, so that we could say, here's the draft that we have, but here are all the things we're talking about changing. It's not really smart, you know.
I think that's such an interesting environment because, you know, you and Rafael have never really worked on a script before. You have a first-time director. You have all these new characters making this one project. So what was that like in terms of kind of like a creative playground? Because didn't seem like there were any boundaries that you knew of because it was all so new.
Yeah, particularly when we started. I think by the time we started shooting, you know, we had all sort of grown up together. So by the time we shot this film, Jess and Keith had done 13 films.
Right.
Like they, you know, they really grew up and learned how to make movies over the course of time. Raphael and I had worked on other shorter form scripts and done a lot of web series together, and so the script we ended up crafting, we knew a lot more than we did when we started. And Carlos is his first feature, but we came up doing music videos together and working on a lot of other really lyrical stuff. And Carlos, we knew from jump, had a real knack for making lyricism seem natural. And we knew that was a trick we needed in a film that I didn't know any other director who did that, so it made sense to work with Carlos. But yeah, I think a lot of the credit for the playground feeling of it goes to our producers, who, even though sometimes they knew better, also knew that we had a particular way that we were trying to tell a story, and they're so artist focused, and they so wanted the vision of the film to reflect our vision, they sort of let us run with it until, you know, there's a scene we really wanted in there where the moving truck is all of a sudden blocked by like 40 capoeiristas in like a hora in the middle of the street,
right.
and they were like, can't afford that. All those capoeiristas are actually stunt actors, and we actually, there's not the budget for that. So like, love you guys' vision, but that's not, that one's not gonna happen, you know? But they would let us push it all the way up to the edge all the time. And Carlos too, getting shots that were too long, that like had, you know, he had really no business in getting from a traditional film standpoint. But when we went into the edit after we were done shooting, we had all of this stuff to play with. We had way more footage. There are many scenes that we cut out. We only shot for 22 days. Like, you know, to have extra in a short time period like that, to have the luxury of, we cut certain scenes 4 and 5 different ways. Like, that's crazy.
That's impressive. I mean, that's what I find so interesting, because you mentioned that this has been a movie that's been a decade in the making, and then you had 22 days to shoot, so it's like, wait, and then let's go. In that kind of time crunch, I mean, because you really had to, that's not a lot of time, and so is there anything that you kind of learned about your own creative process kind of working in such a tight time constraint?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's how rappers always work, I think. That's how I've always worked. I mean, it's always crunched, but like that's when you have to fall back on your instincts, I think, is when a lot of the best stuff happens, especially if you're ready for it. And we had lived with the story for so long. We had sort of massaged the script for so long. It was probably for the best that the shooting was so crunched, so we didn't sit there sweating our acting choices or things like, you know what I'm saying, sort of paying micro attention to things that ultimately would get thrown out in the edit anyway, you know. It allowed us to get, you know, there were certain scenes where we didn't know, we weren't sure what direction we were gonna go in, so I'd be like, Carlos, just like, we'll do one that's like low stakes, middle stakes, and high stakes. Let's just do them in a sequence and run like 3 of them in a row, so we had them so we could decide later, you know. We got to make all kinds of choices like that we were making in the interest of time, but ultimately that ended up giving us more choice later. So. And
you mentioned the not calling them raps, but kind of raps, verse. What is cinematic verses?
Somebody said that.
I don't know. Let's just call them raps. Yeah. But I mean, they play such an integral part in the movie, and it's interesting because when you watch it, it's woven into where it feels natural, but then there's some instances like where the climax of the movie, which I'm not going to ruin it, I promise I'm not going to ruin it, but it's something that like you're like, that would never happen, but it works so well. So it's like this touch of surrealism in a really kind of not heavy story, but it's like there's a lot going on. So how, I guess, like, what was the thinking, and like why was that so important for you to have those verses, other than, you know, you and Raphael flexing your flow, like, well, that was, flexing your ability.
Yeah. When Jess approached Raphael really to do the film, it was because to make a movie, this is, you know, 12 years ago, and it's because she went down a poetry YouTube like wormhole of his.
That was a monster, I think, that she said that was the one that really was just really
exactly. And so she approached him asking if some of this kind of language would transfer to film. So that was really, she asked us to write a movie. Like we weren't really thinking about it. So, but that was one of the things we were trying to do. And in thinking about it over time, what we realized we wanted to do was to be able to use heightened language in a way that's a little more practical and a little more grounded than we normally get to see it in a musical or in a story that is musical about guys who are growing up to be musicians or something. This isn't the. We wanted to highlight the way that language is used in the Bay Area.
Right.
Which is kind of hyper expressive, really metaphor dense, like even in conversation. So knowing that we wanted to get to that final scene, that's one of the oldest things in the script, right? And we were reverse engineering from there. We had to sprinkle in little moments to build the world out to justify somebody speaking like that, right? And so it happens in ways that are overt and subtle. There's like a sort of classic like back and forth freestyle happening early on in the film. But there are also moments.
He's doing the freestyle, like cleaning out the house.
Yeah. But then there are also these moments of, like there's a scene in a beauty parlor that's actually all in verse. It's like subverted. We don't have there's no drum beat under it, and like the cadences are a little subversive. And there's like a crazy like salesmanship scene where Miles is selling a boat that like that is also all in slang, but there's also our subtle hints at cadence there. So we do a lot of work, and we were pretty conscious about it to sort of train your ear. I do this thing when I do rap shows. I try to start every show with a really fast, like language dense a cappella, right? Because it trains an audience's ear to listen to the kind of rapping that they're going to be hearing for the rest of the show, and it makes you able to catch, this is my theory, but it makes you able to catch more later on when all of the musical elements are in there and I'm still rapping really fast. There's a similar thing we were doing with this film, which is just trying to train people's ears to be ready to take in a whole bunch of language at once.
Right. And you mentioned the boat scene, and I love, when he mentions Miles, he mentions that, you got to make it pretty. He's like, you got to give the delivery, you got to make it pretty, you got to make people want it. And I think that's this kind of like this almost meta idea for the film itself, because it's this pretty thing like where you're delivering a lot of really important messages. And so how did you find that balance between art and making sure your message isn't lost by over sugarcoating things in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us it was genuinely to focus on the truth of the situation and to not think about the messages at all. Like in the creation of it, I think you know that they're there and you hope that they're there, but again, like by just trying to be honest about the world we're living in, I think, and to make a film that's really dealing with people's capacity for empathy, like that, those things will come across. I think we've sort of allowed everybody else to affix the headlines, the necessary headlines to this film, but for us it was about people really trying to understand each other in the exact world that we live in now, specifically the Oakland, California that exists right now.
Absolutely.
But I think the sort of gratifying thing about that is people are able to extract all of these lessons from really just watching people do what we're all trying to do every day, which is just like understand each other better. But we don't get to watch it when we're participating in it. So you get to, that's the great thing about movies. You sit back, you watch other people do all the work for you, and then you're like, oh damn, we be working.
Thanks. But I mean, speaking of verses and rapping, and I mean, you're obviously, which clipping. I mean, that was an amazing rap group. Are you guys going to form again?
Oh yeah. Well, we're actually doing a show on Saturday in Oakland, but which is the first time we performed in a long time. I have to relearn a bunch of songs, but yeah, we're working on a new album. It's been a long time coming. There's a bunch of stuff coming out this year. I don't know if I can announce any of it yet, but it's like.
It's not even where I was going with the question.
It just dawned on me, but I appreciate that. I love that group, but it's but we're still working really hard. This next project is really ambitious, so it's taking us a long time. I
mean, I was gonna say, like, with we can't talk about your career without talking about Hamilton, obviously. And I'm just curious to know, because that's how obviously you were working in theater before, and you're working in in music and just really working in all these various fields, and so. But Hamilton is how a lot of us came to know you and your work. So what from that experience what did you learn from that experience that you've applied to other points in your career? Where's a through line that you can say, for example, from Hamilton to Blindspotting?
Yeah, I think Hamilton, being involved in that process sort of reinforced a lot of things that I believed but had never necessarily seen work out on such a grand scale, right? This idea of collaborating outward instead of upward, right? Of working with your friend,
How does that work? Collaborating outward versus upward?
Instead of trying to reach for a more famous director to work with who has a bigger name or whatever, instead of trying to level up in some way that probably has nothing to do with you or what you want to do.
Right.
Working with the people who are your peers, who you know you really want to work with and who you know are committed to the art. Hamilton was a bunch of friends working on a thing, you know. And so that's a thing that I had sort of always believed and a thing I had always practiced, but I'd certainly never seen it pay off on any scale like that. Never seen anybody make that kind of sort of cultural splash or financial splash doing that thing. Nobody in my life who I'd watch do it, but getting to watch Lynn sort of work like that and Tommy work like that. And then this idea of just really committing to what is best for the piece. There were a lot of choices during the Hamilton process that folks didn't really understand. Refusing to go perform on the Grammys, right? They wanted us to come out and perform there, and the creative team refused and said, no, the show is better when you're here, so if you want it, come here and watch us. We wouldn't do any of the parades, right? Hamilton never did it's a thing, Broadway shows go and do Thanksgiving Day parades. We never did it because if you remove the thing from its context, it loses some of its effect. So all the creatives were very, very much intentional about maintaining the context that the show was the best in, always showing it off in the best light. All of the press we did for it was pretty highly, handpicked. It was this very sort of cautious thing about just always making sure that we showed off the thing correctly and intentionally, not letting other people create the narrative for our show. And so that's definitely a lesson that I took away, sort of watching Tommy Kail do all these things and Jeffrey Seller and our producers be like very focused on the narrative that gets out there and controlling the things that you can control. And really trying to protect a thing that you love.
But, speaking of narratives, obviously Oakland, there's been much conversation about Oakland having this moment in Hollywood. You have, Boots Riley, Sorry to Bother You, your film, parts of Black Panther were filmed in Oakland as well. So, when you think about the work that you're doing, kind of spotlighting your hometown, and then you kind of zoom out a little bit and think about, this larger question of diversity in Hollywood, like, what responsibility do you feel as a Black creative?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. As a Black creative, I think I do feel sort of responsible for at least attempting to continue to broaden our mainstream understanding of Blackness. This is a thing that I actually only really started thinking about when I started working on Blackish, but talking to Kenya about adding the character that I play on there, Johan, in, was such an intentional thing for him. He was like, there's a generation gap on our show. There's the kids, and then there's Dre, but there's this middle, like late millennial generation that is not represented, that's so fascinating. And we are a mainstream Black TV show. I would like to represent as many aspects of Blackness as possible. That's such a beautiful thing to do to me, and obviously like it gave me a job that was really fun. I learned so much working on that show, but it's really that mindset that is equal parts conscious and creative, that is something I'm sort of striving to participate in as much as I can. So just, I love, it's one of the reasons Atlanta is so great, right? It's one of the reasons I'm here for everything Lakeith does, right? Like just the way he carries himself publicly. Ryan Coogler's one of those guys too. Like Ryan doesn't code switch for anybody. Ryan's the same in every interview, and I admire that, because we need to sort of champion difference, particularly as we display Blackness. Everybody should be comfortable with all kinds of Blackness. So the more we can telegraph that into people's living rooms, probably the better. So there's that. And I think other than that, also I'm interested in sort of championing other people's stories. If people are I can only do so much. I can only work on so many things, but if people are holding a door open for me, I'm usually pretty intentional, going like, here are 3 women filmmakers names you haven't heard of yet, and here, other people who I know who are dope, who for whatever reason haven't gotten a shot yet. And so it's like, well, you may read their stuff. If you're listening to me, like, you're gonna like them.
Absolutely, and keeping all that in mind, and just thinking of all the different facets of your career. You have music, you have theater, you have TV, you have film, you have all these things. How do you see that how do you see that kind of crystallizing? Like, where do you want your career to go? Not that saying you have to pick one, you know, because there's multi-hyphenates who are successful across the board.
Yeah,
but
we're working on that.
Where do you see your career heading? Like, where are you trying to steer it?
I don't know fully, but I think it is feeling like I'm interested in this idea of championing new voices. Which is also in some ways selfish, because I would like to get back to just sitting around making rap songs sometimes. You know what I'm saying? So I can keep my name ringing a little bit by being like, David Diggs presents somebody else way doper than him. You know what I'm saying? Like, my name.
Just being the hype man for someone
exactly.
else.
Like, and then I can just sit in my room and make some rap songs for a couple years, which would be really lovely. But I am interested in, you know, I come from a community of artists who I think are really wonderful artists, and who I am interested in shining spotlights on, because I think they have valuable things to say. So I'm interested in starting with that community and then letting them reach out to their communities, and you see it working already. You know, you see it with other communities, and at some point our communities will link up. You know,
right.
I met all the folks in Hamilton through a group called Freestyle Supreme, which is the same group that I met Uncut in, who is in our film. You know, so like these things happen. Communities reach out to each other and work with each other, and I'm interested in continuing that sort of outward collaboration.